Okay. So, hey, welcome everyone to the MMA Vivisection. I hope this shit works. We are trying, once again, stumbling through a new format. We are trying to do a little higher production quality because I know that the hallmark for our show forever has been shitty ass production quality.
Oh
And
yeah.
as always, this is Zane Simon. I am joined by Connor Ruebusch, both of us here from BloodyElbow.com. And we are here to talk about UFC 208 going down this weekend. And are you are you as apathetic on this card as literally every other person on the planet?
Yeah, I've actually found this to be a divisive card. Some people are really into it, and I think I fall into that camp. I'm weirdly into this card, and I think because I find all the matchups to be either genuinely well matched, well made, or weirdly interesting. Like I can see Tim Boetsch maybe knocking out Jacare Souza. That's enough for that fight to be interesting to me. There's enough stuff going on here that isn't normal, but that is interesting that I'm okay with it. So, but I know that's not the it's like a 50-50 or maybe like a 70-30 people who find this card to be strange. And of course, I don't fault anyone for being ambivalent about a title fight in a division that has basically no talent outside of Cyborg and maybe Megan Anderson now. It's a strange division now that Cyborg is maybe out of the picture. So who knows what's going on, but I like the fights.
Yeah, okay. It's video production thing. This is going to be a little bit difficult. Okay, we're on a delay by about 20 seconds on live, so that's fine. I'm just trying to figure out how this whole new production thing works. Hopefully, if you missed the intro, Connor's excited about UFC 208. We are talking about UFC 208. This is Zane Simon, and we're breaking down the card. I am excited. I am interested in this card. I don't dislike it, and but I do not know. Like, I get exactly why nobody's that interested in it.
For sure.
And I think the big reason is when it comes to the main card, it's really hard for me to imagine any of the fighters are that interested in it. You know? Like, I'm sure Germaine de Randamie is super thrilled. She's like, fuck yeah, I get to fight for a title. I get to be in the main event. And I'm sure Derek Brunson is super thrilled because he gets to fight Anderson Silva. He's in the co-main right after getting knocked out. And, Boetsch and while Cannonier said he wouldn't take the fight, except that unless he got a new contract against Teixeira. So I'm sure the B-sides are thrilled for a lot of these fights, but it's really hard for me to imagine that Holly Holm, like, her goal is to fight Germaine de Randamie, Even to hear her in interviews, like I remember she had an interview not long ago where she was talking about like, oh, I don't know if I'd face Cyborg. I don't look ahead to the future. And then the moment they're like, but would you fight Ronda Rousey again? She's like, I love that fight. Yeah. And like there's none of that aura coming off of like Holly Holm for Durandamy or Anderson Silva for fighting Derek Brunson or Jacare for fighting Tim Boetsch or any
Yeah.
of that. I
And
can't hear
and you know,
you.
I
Oh, yeah,
I,
okay,
I
no, you're
even
fine.
can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine. Sorry.
Okay. I even think that Cyborg may have been a better matchup for Holly in a weird way. Not only a much bigger money fight, which is probably what she needs at this point in her career, whether
Mm-hmm.
she's winning or losing. She's nearing the end of her run. She's 34 years old. She's been fighting professionally since 2002, and I think training since before then. So a lot of wear and tear. And Cyborg would have pressured her and come after her, which we know makes Holly more effective. And
Yeah.
Durandamy's probably not going to swarm her the way Cyborg would have. So, in a weird way, it may be a more difficult fight. Although, of course, Durandamy does not have Cyborg's underrated wrestling or jiu-jitsu to fall back on,
Yeah.
which could make it more complicated.
It
But
it
it's a weird way to end a pay-per-view, and it seems to be motivated more than anything on the UFC's end by the desire to just have every pay-per-view headlined by a title fight.
yeah. Well, and I honestly think that Cyborg put up good enough numbers that they were like, awesome. Let's build a division around this. Like,
Right.
you're a star. You made something work on your own with no help or very little help from us. You put up big numbers. You proved yourself. And she was like, I can't fight. And, maybe, probably to her credit, or to her own reasoning, and I don't have any problem with that. But they're like, well, we said we were going to make this division, so we're going ahead with it anyway. Because
I mean, Cyborg is the reason for the division because it's the only reason, really. It's a very weak division as far as talent is concerned, and Cyborg was pulling the kind of numbers that Ronda Rousey pulled when she first came to the UFC. She was a big draw, and now not only are there the weight cutting issues, but she's also been flagged with a potential anti-doping violation again. So the division is starting to feel utterly pointless. And once again, I would like to push for a flyweight or atomweight division, in which there are a lot more talent among the women's ranks. But it's what we get.
Yep.
I like watching Holly Holm fight, even when it's not pretty. Holly Holm is a very likable person. She's a very successful and interesting fighter. And Germaine de Randamie finally gets a high-level opponent who will most likely strike with her, which is when her fights are the most exciting. So I think it should be an interesting fight, even if it's not necessarily that meaningful in the end. But we'll get to that, I suppose, at the end.
We will. Anyway, let's jump straight in now to the prelim opener on Fight Pass. Phillipe Nover and Rick Glenn.
Yeah, these are the kind of fights I like on this card. I think this is a really solid fight. Rick Glenn didn't do well in his debut against Evan Dunham, but if it was on short notice and it was a division up from his usual division, he's really best as a very large, very long featherweight. And as a lightweight, some of those advantages go away, especially against another lightweight with very good, consistent boxing. And then we've got Phillipe Nover, one of two Anderson Silvas competing on this UFC card.
Yeah, they couldn't get Uriah Hall, which is a bummer because we could have had all the Anderson Silvas.
All three, yeah. I even said if only we could get Braddock Silva on here, the kickboxer Anderson Silva, we could really have a trifecta. Nover is, of course, very athletic, very fast and explosive, quite well-rounded. Seems to have some kind of mental blocks that I can't quite put my thumb on. He's kind of infamously inconsistent as a fighter, where he sometimes will take long portions of rounds off. Sometimes he will be a great grappler, and other times he'll get stuck on the bottom and look really unremarkable. It's just tough. If he comes out and tries to wrestle Rick Glenn a lot, I think he might have a shot. But the thing with Rick Glenn is that he hits very hard, and he's still a volume puncher. He's a little bit like a slower Conor McGregor in that way. He's got these long arms, big, heavy hands, and he pours it on. He actually had a pretty impressive rally despite the amount of damage he took in that fight with Evan Dunham by the time the third round came around. So I think at some point that volume is going to get to Nover, even if Nover takes some of the early rounds, even if he takes both of the first two rounds. I think Rick Glenn will end up getting to him at some point. So I'm going to go with Glenn by third round TKO.
Well, and the thing about this is, too, that Nover is not a round winner.
Right.
He's just, unless he's absolutely dominating physically.
Yeah. And to his detriment, he's not an amazing finisher either.
No, he's not an amazing finisher, and he's not a round winner. And those are what really spells disaster against Glenn, because Glenn will be coming out to pressure him. He has a long reach. He has some pop in his hands. He doesn't have Nover's striking technique. But as you said, Nover's whole game is kind of, it's kind of like not to say, not to be overly negative, but it's a little inch deep, a mile wide, he does so many things.
Yeah.
But there's not like a really deep fundamental game anywhere.
Maybe that's like the key I was missing to understanding Nover's game, is that there's just not enough depth, even though he can do good things in every phase.
Yep. There's not enough depth, and he's really low output. He doesn't pull the trigger.
Yep.
He can be getting beat on every exchange, and he will still be sitting there waiting for the perfect opportunity to throw a counter, or watching and waiting for a perfect opportunity to land a lead jab, which he won't follow up. And
He's a little too much like current Anderson Silva to be the next Anderson Silva.
yes, indeed. So yeah, I agree. I think you have to pick Glenn here just for his volume and aggression. Because if it's athleticism, then Nover takes it. But that the application is too inconsistent there for me to trust it.
Yep.
Odds here: Nover opened at plus 160, now at plus 167. Glenn opened at minus 210, now at minus 204. I don't think the odds. I'm not surprised the odds haven't moved much, and I don't think they should get. They could even be narrower than this. I would say more in the like plus minus 150 range, because I still have doubts about whether Rick Glenn is like athleticism may be a huge block for him. It could be in sort of the Bilal Muhammad range, where you look at his game outside the UFC and you're like, this guy's really solid and scrappy and well-rounded and does well, and then you get to the UFC and you're watching him get knocked out, going, okay, wait, what's the missing piece that I didn't see? But I still would bet. I still like Glenn as a favorite here, and I don't know that this fight's otherwise worth betting on. The odds are about right.
Yeah, they feel a little wide to me. I think Nover may have some specific stylistic abilities that give Glenn trouble, specifically the wrestling in the top game.
But you would never bet on Nover. Like
I would not. I would never bet on Nover. Notwithstanding this fight in particular. So,
all right, that brings us to a welterweight bout: Ryan LaFlare versus Roan Carneiro. And this should be a pretty reasonably clear fight for Ryan LaFlare for me. He's a very solid counter wrestler with a very good, fundamentally sound wrestling and grappling game, especially from top. I don't think he's ever really. Damian Maia is the only one who really got him down, and that's Damian Maia. And Maia, even then, it took 5 rounds, and LaFlare, I believe, kind of came back at the end and put it on Maia, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, I think he did.
And Carneiro's game, like, he has a little, he kind of like Glenn, he's got long arms, he's got some pop in his arms, but his fundamental box striking is really wooden, and as he gets tired, and he does get tired if he doesn't get exactly the fight he wants, then his defense really strips away in a hurry, and his striking gets really clunky. So, given that I haven't seen many cardio issues out of LaFlare over the years, and given that Carneiro still also tends to shoot a really poor shot from way outside and then have to clinch, wrestle his way down to the ground, I think this should be all LaFlare.
Yeah, Carneiro actually has the makings of a decently well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's, I think he has the makings of a pretty good striker. He has pop in his hands.
Decade ago he did, yeah.
Even now, like, he has the potential, but it's a potential that I don't think will ever be realized, because he has power in his hands. He can throw combinations. His sense of distance is pretty good. The problem is that he has no confidence in it, and I think that's why he shoots from so far away and so weakly too, is that he just does not like to strike. And so it's often desperate, and he starts to flail when he feels pressured, and usually only really relies on his punches as a way of setting up his takedowns. And yeah, LaFlare, long layoff. That's the only real problem I see here is that it was a very long layoff. I don't think Carneiro is better at or close to as good as Damian Maia with his jiu-jitsu. And especially not when it comes to gaining top position. So I think Carneiro will have opportunities, perhaps, because LaFlare, he likes to scramble and often give up good positions on the ground and is very flowy, and sometimes that can lead to you being locked down by somebody with good top game. But so long as LaFlare looks more or less like his old self, I agree it should be a fairly clear-cut decision for him.
Well, and part of it too for me is that LaFlare really wants generally just to strike, which means that it's going to be a lot. Carneiro, his success is going to be a lot based on whether or not he can get LaFlare down, and I just don't think he can.
Agreed, yeah.
So, all right, that brings us the odds on that fight. Carneiro opened at plus 190, now up to plus 230. LaFlare opening at minus 270, now to minus 285. I'm not really surprised the odds are moving wider on that. I still think they are pretty reasonable. And I don't know, LaFlare's not a great finisher, and Carneiro, I do have some, like, I think his gas tank might fail him, and I do worry that he could get himself knocked out or submitted. Because Carneiro has actually been submitted several times over his career. But
how many times has he been subbed?
He has been subbed 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Well, one was via punches to Anderson Silva, but otherwise, John Fitch choked him, Kevin Burns caught him in a triangle, and Tommy Dupre armbarred him. So
yeah, that's not a good sign.
Yeah, and he's been knocked out 1, 2, 3, and then the submission strikes to Anderson Silva, so 4 times as well. So,
and he's 38 and has been fighting for a long time.
Maybe there's a bet to be made for LaFlare inside the distance. Let's see. But LaFlare's just not a finisher.
LaFlare's not a finisher, and the layoff does worry me. I think he may take a little while to get back, get his sea legs back.
So that could just end up being kind of an ugly fight, especially if Carneiro ends up stuck at range and way on the defensive.
Yep.
All right, that brings us to Marcin Tybura versus Justin Willis.
Yeah, Justin Willis, huh?
Yeah.
Very, very short notice replacement. I think this was still a TBA on Wikipedia until yesterday or the day before. So filling in on very short notice. And that's unfortunate because Justin Willis has the makings of a pretty good heavyweight. It's from AKA. Great heavyweight training partners. We know that. Somebody who grew up in Daniel Cormier's wrestling room as a fighter is already has a lot of potential. He seems like Cormier, like Velasquez, to have some pretty good, not perfectly technical boxing, but he's comfortable throwing his hands and standing in the pocket, which was always the surprising thing about guys like Kane and Cormier. When they were very young and experienced fighters, they were still taking it to people on the feet.
Yeah, he's got a very early Cormier-like striking game.
Yeah, definitely. And he's got some powerful wrestling. He's a big, strong dude. I don't really know how well he fares against a really good fighter because he hasn't really fought any. He's very inexperienced. And I don't know what his stamina really looks like, especially on such short notice. Let me check his record real quick. He does have a majority decision, which is not a great sign.
No.
Against a 3-1-1 fighter. So I'm going to go with Tybura because he's tough, because he's had a full camp, because he is experienced enough with a bunch of weird styles to deal with a wrestler. He has dealt with wrestlers in the past, but I would not be shocked if Willis surprises him with some early aggression because Tybura is still quite hittable, still not very comfortable in boxing range, and still not a fantastic defensive wrestler. So there are a lot of things that make this a good stylistic matchup for Willis. It's the fact that he's so inexperienced and raw, and the fact that he is fighting on such short notice that gives me pause.
Well, I have to say too, I mean, I realize it's Victor Pesta, so I can't, who has some of the clunkiest, most wooden, most unnatural striking in the UFC heavyweight division. But Tybura in that fight looked in world's better shape.
Very true. Yeah.
And he looked like he had put a lot of work into his kickboxing.
I agree. He looked more comfortable in the pocket. He looked more willing to pull the trigger. He threw a lot more volume, and his triggers, his counters were absolutely on point. But again, Pesta, he's not a punching machine. You know what I mean? He's a takedown machine for a reason.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing, like, I remember, like, a minute into that fight being like, oh my god, Victor Pesta is going to get knocked out hard.
Yeah, it was pretty clear that there were levels to the striking game in that bout.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if you saw Willis's fight against, or his last bout in World Series of Fighting, I can't remember, versus Juliano Coutinho.
Yeah.
But he really, his wrestling did not show up that great in that fight.
Yeah.
He ended up really wading in with a lot of, both hands out, kind of throwing hooks at the same time with both hands. He also has this weird thing where, despite being a southpaw, almost all of his striking offense comes off of his right hand lead. Like, all of his power striking is mostly like he'll throw a lead hook and a lead uppercut and a lead jab, and then I think he'll like re-square himself to throw the left. So it may be that he's doing the wrestling thing of actually standing with his power hand forward.
Maybe, yeah. It's an interesting point.
So I don't trust, like, he has some natural ability and a very good willingness to throw his hands, but he also looked pretty tired by the halfway through the first round in that fight,
Right.
and that's
not going to get better with 1 day's notice.
So I got to go Tybura all the way here. There could be some, if Willis just charges out and gets a huge takedown and can out-athlete him, there could be a surprise, but Tybura's been around the block a few times. He knows how to make things happen, and he's been a pretty good grappler too. So, odds on that fight just opened, and let's see, they opened at plus 175 and are at plus 180 now for Willis, and opened at minus 245 and are now at minus 240 for Tybura. It's heavyweight. It's over 200. I don't know. It's over minus 200 for Tybura. I would probably just ignore it.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on. I wouldn't bet on this fight at all.
Under 1.5 round. Even then, like, Tybura, he's not known as being this great knockout artist yet.
And we don't know how good Willis is. There are just too many question marks.
Yeah, there are just too many questions for it. I would just ignore it. And that brings us to a flyweight bout. Ian McCall, Jared Brooks. I like this signing. I like seeing Jared Brooks in there.
Mm-hmm.
Watching him compete over in Pancrase. He knows how to bite down and swarm guys. He's got a good, fun power striking game. He's got an athletic grappling game, and he looks like he's got the kind of size and stamina that he can be a really fun action flyweight, keep up with guys.
And he knows how to grab the mic and call Japanese fighters bitches and punk bitches and bitches a lot. That was a really good post-fight interview after his last fight.
I don't think he's going to beat Ian McCall unless Ian McCall just does not show up at all. Like that, I like this fight because he's got the classic puncher's chance that Ian McCall is willing to give just about anyone for his willingness to just sit down, bite down on the mouthpiece, and brawl with the guy when a guy comes in to throw hands at him. But even seeing the Lineker fight, like, McCall's footwork is just so good and his movement is so good that it's too difficult for me to see Brooks's chasing, winging, striking style doing more than leaving openings for McCall to attack. Even just wrestling openings. I mean, McCall's still a phenomenal wrestler and takedown artist. And Brooks is a scrappy. He's a good scrambler, and he's scrappy on the ground. But his wrestling is maybe the worst part of his game. Like, in that fight he had in Pancrase, he actually, like, started out in bad positions a few times and had to scramble his way through them. His
takedowns were all right. He's got some okay double legs against the fence.
Yeah, he's got some okay double legs, but even still, I would say his technique there is probably where I would say, like, his scrambling and striking are both more developed than his wrestling.
So. Yeah, that's fair. He's I actually kind of like Brooks in this fight. Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, I'm not sure how much time Ian McCall has left as a top contender. That'll be the first time I say this in this card, but
yeah, that's very reasonable. McCall, we don't even, he hasn't fought since 2015. He's barely fought.
It's a goddamn miracle that this fight actually, it looks like it's actually about to happen. It'll probably still get canceled. Like, Jared Brooks will come down with walking pneumonia during his ring walk and the fight will have to be canceled. So yeah, it's been a while since we've seen him. He looked good. I mean, the thing is that Ian McCall's always been capable of looking very good
Yeah.
because he's a very good fighter, but he has some serious drawbacks.
Oh yeah.
And in that John Lineker fight, the big issue for him was just the pathological aggressiveness of Lineker. Like the moment that McCall felt that he could not out wrestle Lineker, the moment he got caught in that guillotine, and it wasn't even like it was super close. Lineker's got a good guillotine, a good squeeze, but McCall escaped it.
Yeah.
That completely scared him off his wrestling game, and he didn't have any confidence in his striking with somebody who was so aggressive and so powerful. And Brooks to me is like a combination of Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, where he's got this power, stocky wrestling, this powerful build, these heavy hands, but he's also crazy aggressive, much more so than Michael Chandler. And he seems to have pretty solid stamina for a guy who throws absolutely everything with full power.
That's the joy of flyweight.
Right. Yeah. So I think he's a pretty dangerous prospect right now. And if Ian McCall slips up once, I think he's just a little too prone to letting the fight get away from him. And against a certain level of fighter, that doesn't matter. Against Iliardi Santos, he can foolishly decide to kickbox with Santos throughout the bout and still get a decision. But against somebody with something of that Lineker style, against somebody who's really dangerous and won't just lull McCall into a fight, but will scare him into a certain kind of fight, will really get in his head and mess with his confidence, I am not confident that he'll be able to deal with it. I know it's a risky pick, but I like Jared Brooks by decision.
Well, picking against Ian McCall is never that risky because the mental aspect is there. He's very capable. He almost lost that Iliardi Santos fight.
Yeah,
like
I mean his last two wins are an old Brad Pickett and Iliardi Santos.
Yeah,
and granted, he's fought very good fighters that have given him his losses, but.
Yeah. But I think I think Brooks trends a little closer to Iliardi Santos right now than he does John Lineker. Like, the aggression, it's not as crafty as what Lineker does. Like, Lineker's ability to sort of control how somebody moves around him. And even then, early on in that fight, McCall had a pretty easy time of it until he's lost that confidence in his striking.
Yeah, it was very much like Jessica Andrade versus Angela Hill. If Angela Hill totally abandoned the game plan when she started to get hit.
Yeah, and
But before that, he looked as good as Angela Hill because Ian McCall is again technically a good fighter.
Yeah, I don't think that Brooks has the cage craft yet. Even though Lineker's cage craft isn't great, I think it's better than Brooks is right now. I think he's too chasing, and I think that the McCall can make that give him fits.
Lineker's more patient. He attacks in straight lines, but he'll cut off the cage and wait for his opportunity to initiate one of those attacks.
Yeah,
he'll put you and keep you in an uncomfortable position and then rush you.
So but like I say, I would never just say like, oh, Ian McCall is such a safe bet. And in fact, in the odds right now, the odds are trending towards dead even. McCall opened at -185, now at -108. And Brooks opened at +145, now down to -115. Man, I don't even know that I could say that Ian McCall is worth an underdog bet as he trends towards positive. But he's a legit top 10 flyweight going against a guy that's been brought in on relatively short notice. And
yeah, that's fair.
At some point, especially if the odds keep skewing, McCall might be worth a bet, but the inconsistencies are a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would not bet on Brooks, especially not as a favorite.
No, it's kind of a hunch pick,
That brings us to Nick Lentz versus Islam Makhachev.
I really like this fight. This to me is one of the more interesting bouts, not only on the undercard, but on this entire card. Islam Makhachev, I have spoken very highly about him in the past. Very hyped about his prospects as a fighter. He's still young. He trains with Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, Khabib Nurmagomedov's father. And alongside guys like Khabib and I can't remember Khabib's little brother's name, but he's also a very good mixed
Abubakar,
martial artist. There we go. Yeah.
his
Abubakar.
cousin, his brother by adoption.
Gotcha. So, but he's also a very good fighter. It's a good training camp, and those guys obviously have connections with American camps like AKA. And Makhachev is a really, really good transitional fighter. He's basically his game lives in the transitions. And I think we've seen a few times in his career that if you trap him in any one position or range, that's when he struggles. That'll probably get better with time and maybe a more single-minded focus on what he's really best at, which is his sort of positional grappling. Like Nurmagomedov has a single-minded focus on that aspect of his game. Perhaps that'll be the key for him. But until that happens, I think Nick Lentz is kind of a tough fight for him. Nick Lentz getting older, stamina not as good as it once was, but still very tough, still hits harder than you think he does, still scrambles and wrestles very well, is loath to give up top position for any reason whatsoever, and does not stay in bottom for very long against anyone. It takes a really dangerous submission artist to submit Nick Lentz. In fact, I think Charles Oliveira may be the only one to have ever done it. You can fact check me on that, but
yeah, that's it. He got submitted by an arm bar by some dude named Brian Green in 2006, but otherwise that is correct.
Yeah, in the modern era of Nick Lentz, only one of the most dangerous submission artists in all of MMA was able to wrap up his neck, and in a competitive fight that Lentz almost won. So, yeah, I you know what I'm reminded, and I referenced this in my Sherdog preview. I'm reminded of your words of wisdom before Chaz Skelly versus Darren Elkins, when I foolishly picked the young gun to out OG the original OG, the OOG. I picked him to out Elkins, and he didn't. And I, at the time, I said, Skelly's style is not exactly like Elkins' style, but that wasn't the point. The point is that he was going to engage Elkins in the type of fight in which Elkins excels. And I think that's also the case here. I think Makhachev, to win this fight, really has to wrestle Lentz. And if he doesn't want to, Lentz is going to wrestle him anyway.
Yeah.
Makhachev, very smooth. It'll probably be a very back and forth fight. And so Makhachev could easily win it. But I think that little experience edge is going to be the deciding factor. So I'm going to go with Lentz by unanimous decision.
You know what? And now I'm probably about to not take my own advice because I am going to pick Islam Makhachev. And I'm going to do it on two bases here, really. One of them is that, unlike Elkins, Lentz has never been tireless.
Yeah.
He has even in his best runs, he's always been a fighter that, like, halfway through the third round, his opponent will be like, "Wait a minute, I can just beat this dude," and start wailing on him. And Nick Lentz then spends the last 2.5 minutes of a fight gassed out and getting whomped on by Hakran Diaz and Diego Nunez. He's always been he's so big and powerful and muscly that he's relentless, and he spends that energy.
He doesn't really have a first gear.
No. The other thing for me is that fight against Michael McBride. Michael McBride is not a good fighter. And I don't mean to be hard on the guy, but he is wooden in a way that few fighters are wooden. Like, he kind of, and I like Kenny Robertson, but he kind of reminds me of Kenny Robertson without any of the flowy grappling.
Yeah. A more awkward Kenny Robertson. That's
yes.
Not glowing praise.
And Lentz nearly got knocked out by him.
Yeah, that was surprising.
And that, he also had a lot of trouble controlling him. He didn't have any trouble getting him down. But on the ground, he slid off a lot of positions. He ended up having to strike a lot and got hurt because he couldn't control the positions. And I think that Makhachev is just too tough and too flowy on the ground and too durable and too relentless that if Lentz cannot submit him, if Lentz cannot control him, he's going to fade and he's going to give Makhachev too many opportunities late to hurt him as the fight goes on. So I could see Lentz coming out of the gate and putting Makhachev on his back and just putting a grind on him for a round, and then the fight slowly starting to shift away from that. So I'm going to pick Makhachev for that reason, because Makhachev also in a similar fight with Chris Wade, where Chris Wade started strong, had him down. Makhachev locked up an early triangle. He couldn't finish. Wade finished the fight, or the first round, on top. As the fight went on, Wade just started fading, and Makhachev just got better and better. And I feel like this is that fight.
Super hard to out transition him.
Yeah.
I mean, if you give him the chance to scramble, he's usually, you may have out-thunk me again here, Zane, because I do think the stamina is the thing. Darren Elkins is actually he's actually a pretty good parallel for Chaz Skelly.
Yeah.
In that neither of them seem to have any idea how to strike, despite tons of training, which has supposedly taught them to do so. Both are still very effective. So you may be onto something there. You may be. I'm also, however, not totally sold on Islam Makhachev's like fighter mentality.
Yeah.
Nor am I totally sold on durability.
Yeah. That could be a real question. The only reason I'm not as banking on that is that Lentz, for all his power, has rarely found the consistency to knock anybody out.
Yeah. I have this weird feeling that Makhachev is maybe a little too cerebral to be a really great mixed martial artist. And that at this point in his career, it's going to be just sort of the rawness that Lentz has always possessed that's going to surprise him a bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I've always liked Lentz, is that unlike a lot of guys that have been targeted as grinders, Lentz has always been a dude that has always just been, out there to hurt and scrap and punish people as much as he could, which is also why he burns through his gas tank.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the odds for that fight. I always say that like I'm going to transition to the next fight because I think I am, and then I remember the odds. And Islam Makhachev is the favorite, trending towards a heavy favorite, -1, opening at -160 now to -298. Nick Lentz opening at +120 now to +238. I think Lentz is absolutely worth an underdog bet at those odds.
I thought I got a steal on Nick Lentz at +200. Now I'm wishing that I'd waited and placed my small bet later.
Yeah, so as those trend, Lentz is worth something. He wins way too much to give him those kind of bad odds against Islam Makhachev.
He has seen so many things that Islam Makhachev has not yet imagined. Just a long career, and I don't think he's really quite at the end of it just yet. So,
and it's not like Makhachev is some kind of great finisher himself.
No, yeah,
he's got a few submissions on his record against pretty underwhelming competition. And
again, that may be his specialty, but hoping to submit Nick Lentz.
Yeah, that's really he's mostly a submission finisher, and Lentz is really hard to submit. So if this is a scrappy decision, Lentz could pick up the first 2 rounds before he fades in the third, and Makhachev takes over, and it doesn't matter.
I think it will be a really fun back and forth scrambling match.
I do too, because there's no way Lentz doesn't let him wrestle, and Makhachev really only has a passing interest in striking at range.
Has Lentz ever adjusted his style for anybody?
No.
That's what makes him the grinder, right? He may be meaner than other grinders, but that's what a grinder does. You go in there and you grind, goddammit. And that's what Nick Lentz is going to do.
That brings us to a flyweight bout, Wilson Reis versus Ulka Sasaki. And
poor Sasaki.
This fight, I don't know why it got made the first time, and it got scrapped, and I was like, great, they'll make a better fight for Wilson Reis. And then they remade this fucking fight.
They don't like this guy, this poor Japanese dude. He finally gets a good win in the UFC. They're like, you know what? Fuck you. The guy who was going to challenge for the title, he's going to whip your ass.
Yeah, because Sasaki's not even close to being a ranked flyweight in a division where half the fighters in it are ranked.
Yeah.
It's, Sasaki has had problems with people who can strike better than him, which Wilson Reis absolutely can. Reis is not the best defensive striker, but he throws with power, and he's willing to step into it. And Sasaki has been submitted by better grapplers, which Willie Gates absolutely is. Or not Willie Gates, but Wilson Hayes absolutely is. Willie Gates, Willie Gates when Sasaki had a huge aggressive wrestling edge that he put on Gates because was never able to pick up wrestling defense fundamentals.
And he was, like we always say, you should be if you're a grappler. He was fully committed to that wrestling.
Yep.
But it's still a little too much like Japanese pro wrestling style, where it's clinch takedowns, low singles, basically the last kind of stuff that's going to work against Hayes, who the best aspect of his game may be his wrestling.
Yeah. So I'm picking Wilson Hayes all the way here. I don't really see a clear path to victory for Sasaki unless he pulls off some kind of miracle.
Sasaki's dangerous. He's got the submission game. He could find something. And Hayes has been knocked out. He can be hurt. We know that. Yep. Sasaki, I think, has some underrated power in his hands.
He's really, really wooden, though.
Yes, he's very stiff on the feet. He's not comfortable as a striker. Very poor defensively, both with his striking and his wrestling. I just don't see how he has any kind of all of the averages are stacked against him. You know what I mean?
The only people that have knocked Hayes out too are Patricio Pitbull and Eduardo Dantas, who are really dynamic.
Power punchers too, like both very powerful strikers. So I don't know why this fight got remade. I don't know why it was made in the first place, as you said. I think Hayes by TKO or submission at some point is very likely because I just think he's a level above Sasaki.
Yeah, Sasaki will be willing to engage him on the ground, and he's lanky enough that I think Hayes can find his neck. So, Hayes opening at minus 350, now to minus 614. Sasaki opening at plus 250, now to plus 441. I have no problem with those odds.
There's some real value in the total here, I think.
Hayes inside the distance is plus 115.
Right. And just under 2.5 rounds with no winner picked is plus 105.
Yeah. So getting Hayes at plus odds there, or you could even bet on Hayes inside the distance at plus 115, and Hayes by decision is plus 126. So you could cover both. If you're
that seems odd because the other odds are so wide.
Yeah.
I just think no one's betting on the fight, so the lines probably haven't moved.
No, they moved a bunch though. Like I said, they opened at minus 350 and are now minus 614. Although they jumped really quickly after they opened. So
the props have not moved though.
Yeah, the props.
For example, Hayes inside distance opened at plus 109.
Yeah.
And it's at plus 115. So basically the fight is so uninteresting to people that no one has caused the lines to move. So I think you may be in on a little bit of a hidden gem there with those bets. Not that it's a lock. Don't ever treat any of our bet suggestions as locks. I just bet for fun and Zane doesn't bet at all. Yep. But still, there's an opportunity there.
There's an opportunity. I'm just looking at the odds. I'm saying there's a better than underdog odds that Hayes wins this fight by submission.
Yeah. Let me quickly see if I can figure out what the implied odds for that are. Plus 115 that Hayes wins inside the distance. Translates to, let's see, a 46% chance that he wins by finish. I think the odds are higher than that.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty likely he finds a finish at some point.
Yeah, Hayes, half his wins are by submission.
Yeah.
Out of his 21 wins, 10 are by submission. So, all right, that brings us to a welterweight bout: Randy Brown versus Belal Muhammad.
I really like this fight too. It's fights like these that are making this card for me. I think Randy Brown is a solid prospect. We know that. Easily the most successful discovery from looking for a fight. Since everybody else was just matched really terribly and got destroyed. Randy Brown has been looking pretty good. Belal Muhammad, interesting fighter, got knocked out really badly in his last fight, but we know that he is capable of more than that. He's a solid fighter, a solid and a surprisingly well-rounded fighter in his own right. The big thing for me is that Randy Brown in his last bout finally showed the one thing that I was waiting and hoping and praying and silently pleading for every single time I saw him fight in the UFC, which was a jab.
Mm.
Because Randy Brown's a long and tall guy, and frame does not dictate style. Personality tends to dictate style more consistently, but it was clear that Brown wanted to fight from the outside. And yet, for some reason, with the desire to fight from long range and with this incredible build for that style, he never jabbed. For his first 2 or 3 UFC fights, he jabbed very rarely. He did a lot of the sort of Neil Magny thing, kind of just pawing with his left hand and jumping in with rights and throwing kicks and going for the clinch. And I was confused by it. And then he fought Brian Camozzi. It was probably the time when he needed that jab the most, because he was faced with a fighter who, like Matt Dwyer before him, was similar to Randy's size, but who was a much more technical striker. And he kind of picked Camozzi apart. He ended up in trouble at one point when he took Camozzi down, but he defended a submission well and basically won every other minute of the fight. He hurt Camozzi at range. He hurt Camozzi in the clinch. He took him down with ease. The well-roundedness of Randy Brown's game, he is really starting to look like the sort of John Jones type that he looked like he could turn into. So Randy Brown with a jab is really solid, using that to set up. And I think, too, he actually has some surprising power of his own. He throws his strikes a little weirdly, but people are affected when he lands clean on the chin. So there's something to it. Bilal Muhammad is a perfectly reasonable fighter to test Randy Brown, and he could very well beat Randy Brown. We've talked about him in the past, of course. He's a technical offensive striker, but it's become more and more apparent with each passing fight that defense is a serious problem for him. And somebody who can pick him off on the way in or land shots on him at his preferred range, which is also long range, where he will have a reach disadvantage, can find his chin and he can be hurt. And if Randy Brown has the power that I suspect he does, and if he can control the distance against Muhammad, who, by the way, is once again fighting on short notice, then I think Randy Brown by a late TKO is a likely possibility.
Yeah, the biggest thing here that has me picking Brown is that Muhammad is so limited in his options of control for this fight. He's not a bad wrestler.
No, he's pretty good. His timing is really good on his takedowns.
Yeah, but he's not an amazing, like, dominant wrestling force on the ground. It's more like he can dump you, and then he might be able to, like, beat you up a little bit as you get back up, and then he'll go back to boxing range.
Yeah.
You know, he's not a fighter that's really interested in, like, putting a concerted wrestling grind on someone or really masterfully out-grappling them. I think his back take game is not bad, but it's not, you know, it's not the centerpiece of his game.
Right.
And so a lot of, you know, where he wants to be is in the pocket boxing or out at range building behind his jab.
Mm-hmm.
And Brown is going to be, you know, he's going to be comfortable working from range. He's going to have the distance, the reach advantage. He's a little more creative out there. And he's probably going to force Muhammad into the pocket, I think, from there. And the problem with that is that Muhammad can't then afford to get into the clinch with Brown. Because that is the most overlooked part of Brown's game and surprising part of his game is that he is an excellent clinch fighter. Really shockingly good there. And I think if he can bait Muhammad into closing the distance on him, then he can wrap him up in the clinch and work him over with knees and elbows. So I'm picking Brown probably by like maybe second round TKO, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm with you. It could be a submission too. Brown has a knack for those front headlock submissions. He's again, not to just make the John Jones comparison because he's tall and long and a black guy who's like a prodigy, but he's also surprisingly, he's like Jones was, and in some ways maybe still is, a shockingly competent grappler who still has obvious holes in what he does.
Yeah.
You know, he's He's probably primed still at this point for a prospect loss, the typical submission loss that prospects often get at some point that could still be around the
He
corner.
already had one
Right. To Michael Graves.
Yeah,
and he could wind into one, even if I'm thinking one, even if he's in a good top position, like Jones versus Belfort. That could happen because he's a little too loosey goosey with the way he flows on the ground.
And welterweight isn't light heavyweight. There's not nearly as much forgiven at 170.
But he does know what he's doing on the ground. He's just a little too eager to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is too that it seems like he learns really quickly. Like he's progressing fight to fight. May not be always the way you expect, but he's a guy that is eager to get in the gym and figure things out and figure out.
I was not sold on Randy Brown straight away, but I'm starting to think he is has a lot of talent, and I'm just waiting for all of the rest of the discipline to fall into place.
And having a great clinch game like he does is going to save him a lot of heartache, because like 80% of fighters out there cannot resist fighting in the clinch.
Yeah, and he's already better at boxing in the pocket than Jones was at his point of development. Yeah. Jones didn't really learn to box that well until 2014. So yeah, Brown is he's on his way, man. I'm pretty hyped about him, so I hope to see good things.
He's the favorite here, opening at -135, still at -135. At one point, it looks like he kind of went up to -120 territory and dropped back down. So some movement on that line to establish it back where it opened. Muhammad opening at -105, now out to +112. I think Brown at these close odds is still worth a bet, frankly. My faith in Muhammad's defense and his ability to make his, like, I feel like so much of the style he established regionally ended up being based around him also being a much better, faster athlete than a lot of the fighters he faced.
And that's not the case here.
And that's not the case anymore. And it's now since opened up that he's not defensively sound enough to build behind his jab the way that he wants to.
Yeah. And again, I should emphasize that Muhammad he's durable for the most part, despite the fact that he does not move his head one whit. Not most people do not do to him what Vicente Luque did to him. He's eaten shots in the past and taken them well. And a lot of me thinking that Brown will finish him is kind of based on Brown rapidly improving and being a little more dangerous with his hands than it might appear at first.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily pick any over under any prop bets in this, because Brown is a great athlete who could finish Muhammad, and he's also a really raw talent that could underperform, and Muhammad could get a surprising sub win or something like that. And but I think as a slight favorite, Brown is worth a bet.
I think so. Brown inside the distance is +185, which is not terrible odds, but I think it's a little too risky.
Yeah, I think it's just not certain enough for me on that. Even though he's proven himself to be, he's also got great cardio and has been a great late finisher too. As fights go on, he only seems to get more dangerous, which is another good mark in his favor.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to, that's the end of the prelim card. So that brings us to the pay-per-view opener, Dustin Poirier versus Jim Miller. And this is going to be a damn fun scrap. Like, I am excited for this fight, without question. I'm leaning towards Poirier, and the biggest reason I'm doing that is that, A, Miller has a history of fading as fights go. Poirier, while he's a great early finisher, has also showed, like in that Duffy fight, that he is in excellent conditioning as well. And otherwise, I like Poirier's movement. His ability his footwork is pretty solid. And Miller, like, the biggest problem for Poirier, and this is the thing that really bit him against Michael Johnson, is that his offense only works if his striking offense only works if he marches through fire to do it. Like, he's not ever going to just be like the stick and move, pick you off kind of fighter.
He's less hittable than he was.
He's less hittable than he was,
but he's still, just by nature of his style, he's going to be hit, and he's also not the best, still not close to the best defensive pressure fighter out there.
No, but I don't feel like, and Miller has some power, but I don't feel like that stopping power has ever been consistent enough to have me feeling like he can take advantage of the fact that at some point Poirier will be walking through him. And like part of that too is just a size thing. Poirier's a massive, rangy lightweight. Miller has always been kind of a stumpy dude. And I don't feel like Miller can overpower Poirier, so I feel like Poirier's movement is too good, and his ability to pressure is good enough combined with that movement that he's not going to let Miller off the hook striking, give Miller time, and I think it's going to force Miller to tire himself out, and eventually I think Poirier could probably finish him late as the fight goes on, maybe with a TKO.
Yeah, I don't think Poirier too. I mean, we know he can be cracked. We've seen him hurt a few times. He was hurt in the Eric Koch fight. He was knocked out twice, but I don't think he's chinny per se.
He walks in with his head up, and that's how his style is built.
He's there to be hit, and it has been, the two guys who knocked him out have been extremely fast.
Joe Duffy landed like 50 bombs on him that would have knocked out anyone.
Right. Yeah, so he's definitely not, he's not chinny. I don't think so. And Jim Miller does not have the kind of length or the shocking speed that guys like Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor have.
Yeah.
It's not close. He's always been an underrated kickboxer. I've been saying that for a long time, that Jim Miller wins a lot of minutes of a lot of fights with his Muay Thai. Even if he's not usually knocking people out, he's good.
He put it on Thiago Alves.
Sure, yeah. Mixed up his wrestling. And Thiago Alves, by the way, looked pretty good in that fight despite the weight issues. He didn't not show up. So Jim Miller is a good striker, better than advertised, but he's also a little too willing a striker, and that has gotten him in trouble in the past. And while he has he ever been knocked out?
Yeah, he's been knocked out by Donald Cerrone, and
right. I thought Cerrone choked him out after kicking him in the head, but he just kicked him in the head. I know he's been hurt.
I think that's his only knockout, actually. So
yeah, I know he's been hurt. Nate Diaz had him really hurt.
Yeah.
Cerrone had him hurt.
He's only been finished 3 times, in fact. I think just 3 times in his whole career. So
yeah. He's less finishable than Joe Lozon, his constant companion among lightweight action fighters. Even so, I do think Dustin Poirier is going to knock him out because Miller's getting on in years. He has not looked as consistent. I love the fact that he's put together a 3-fight winning streak after the loss to Diego Sanchez, which is when both you and I swore off ever believing in Jim Miller again.
Yeah.
And that showed us, because Jim Miller is a good, creative fighter, very resourceful, and of course, extremely experienced. He's been fighting the best in the lightweight, best in the deepest division for a very long time. So he has that going for him, but his inconsistency as an older fighter is still there, especially with things like stamina. And I think without being able to easily take Poirier down and hold Poirier down, that suspect stamina that he now has in most of his fights is not going to be very helpful. He's not going to have any time to rest. Basically, as you said, Poirier is not going to forgive him for making any mistakes. He's not going to let him off the hook at any point. And speaking of hooks, it's exactly what you do not want to take from Dustin Poirier. So I think Poirier is going to knock him out. But I think it's going to be a great fight. And I would love if Jim Miller beat Dustin Poirier. I really like Dustin Poirier. I think he's a great guy, but I would love if Jim Miller beat a really solid lightweight contender at this stage in his career.
You know what's really weird? Dustin Poirier is only 1 inch taller than Jim Miller.
Right. Yeah.
And doesn't have much reach on him either. I think maybe only an inch of reach.
Good thing he's not going to try and use it anyway.
Jesus. That's really weird to me because I think
Yeah.
of Dustin Poirier even as a lightweight as kind of a big lightweight,
Yeah.
or at least like a rangy lightweight.
He's not really. He was
Nah,
just kind of he's not. I don't think he was even crazy big for featherweight.
no,
Like he wasn't bigger than Chan Sung Jung when they fought.
no. I'm
He's
just.
just
It's just his body
just
shape. It
yeah.
fools me somehow.
Certain guys like Brian Melanson always looked like he could cut weight, but he just couldn't do it. Other guys have difficulties. Guys like Kelvin Gastelum, Johnny Hendricks. There's dietary issues, but some guys just have more trouble cutting weight than others.
Yeah, so Miller won't have a huge size disadvantage. That changes my thinking a little, but not a lot. It means that there's a chance, a better chance that Miller could get his wrestling game going,
Yeah.
but and that he could maybe overwhelm Poirier with it, but I still don't trust it.
There's also a chance that Poirier could get his wrestling game going, and it might actually be handy for him. Miller's
Poirier is
dangerous
a
off
very
his back,
underrated wrestler.
yeah, with really scary ground and pound.
Definitely. Either way, Poirier is just more danger. I mean, of his 20 wins, 10 are by knockout, 6 are
And
by
more
submission.
and more lately. Whereas Miller has stopped getting finishes.
Yep.
And Dustin Poirier's been picking him up more than ever. Dude, by the way, one little interesting thing I noticed while researching this card, you know, when Dustin Poirier was fighting Joe Duffy, and he did that neat little, the old school reach for the ankle and then come back with a punch trick.
Yeah.
I think he got it from Chan Sung Jung.
Yeah.
Because I rewatched his fight with the Korean Zombie, and KZ hit him with a nasty shot with the exact same move. So I like to see that. Like Canelo Alvarez learned to be sticky with his punches after he fought Floyd Mayweather, and Dustin Poirier is learning to be a sneaky bastard in the guard from the Korean Zombie. I like to see that.
All right. Odds on this fight are honestly a little ridiculous to me. Poirier is opened at minus 190 and is now up to minus 448.
Yeah.
And Miller opened at plus 150 and is now at plus 345. Like, okay, we both picked Poirier to win, and we both picked him by knockout. But Miller is an effective, scrappy fighter who knows what he's doing in there, and Poirier is a very good, powerful fighter who can still just get totally caught out by guys.
Mm-hmm.
I am confident in Poirier winning this fight. I am not that confident in Poirier.
Poirier should be a sizable favorite, but not near minus 500. That's a little too much.
Yeah.
I will say that maybe it's an issue with this entire card, or not an issue for bettors, but like the other fight we were looking at, the props have some value here. The line on under 2.5 rounds for two such prolific finishers has not moved much at all, and it's right currently at minus 110.
Yeah. Poirier's only won 4 decisions in his career.
Yeah, and basically under 2.5 rounds statistically just kind of means someone gets a finish.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I mean, neither guy's easy to finish, but they're both super dangerous and super willing to exchange.
And Poirier inside the distance, if you think it's just going to be him, is plus 105.
Yeah.
So
there's value on those.
Indeed. And that brings us to Glover Teixeira versus Jared Cannonier.
I really like this fight, and I did not like this fight at all when it was first made. For the usual reasons, because everybody knows I'm a goddamn Grinch when it comes to, interesting fights being made. I want to protect all the prospects and don't match them up with too much too soon. And I know that's not the UFC's mentality all the time. Although we discussed that a little bit more realistically last week and thought maybe they just have a good eye for who is capable and who isn't. And they have certain fighters where they have to say, shit or get off the pot. And that's just, UFC's very much a now sort of organization, or at least it has been in the past. You know what I mean? Like, show me what you have.
Yeah, it's a battle of ideologies from the days when they classically, it was just, we signed you, that means you are a top level pro who should fight for a title anytime in the next year.
Yeah.
And the ideology now of signing every half decent fighter in the world at any given time.
Yeah.
And they're always trying to battle that ideology.
Right. It's a conflict.
Yeah.
Combat sports is all about conflict in every sense of the word. So, but I like this fight. I think it's actually a really fascinating style matchup and made more competitive by the fact that Glover Teixeira, like, who did I say it about before? Like Ian McCall before him, is probably not long for the top 5 of the light heavyweight division. I think he's still making small adjustments and refinements to his technique. But at this point, we know what kind of fighter Glover Teixeira is. He's not going to surprise us. He's been doing it for a long time. I think he's been fighting since 2002.
Yeah.
That's a guess.
2002, yeah.
Yeah, so he's been fighting for a very long time. A lot of fights. More recent ones, first knockout since the first fight of his career. Again, against Anthony Johnson, but still can't be good for a 38-year-old man's brain. And, the fight with Jones, things have been kind of dicey here and there for Glover Teixeira. He had a very close fight with OSP, too. That fight was pretty tough for him at first. And I think that fight may be the best parallel for this one because Jared Cannonier, like OSP, is a fighter who's effective from long range, good counter striker, very athletic, very powerful, athletic and explosive. We know the meme. But unlike OSP, Cannonier is a good boxer. OSP is kind of all athleticism, and that's been his drawback. Jared Cannonier seems to have similar athleticism. And let's not forget, he's a very powerful puncher. He was a heavyweight, of course, for the first, 9 or 8 fights of his career. And in those, he had pretty much all knockouts.
He had knockouts
or
and submissions
by punches.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. He had he had a rear naked choke and an armbar in there, and everything else was, except for his split decision to Tony Lopez.
Yeah. So it's mostly knockouts, and Tony Lopez is insanely tough, or at least, historically has been. He's maybe not so tough anymore, but the dude's taken a lot of punches. So Jared Cannonier has power. He has the power to knock out heavyweights. We know he can hurt light heavyweights. If Yohan Cutelaba was not so damn tough himself, he may have been knocked out in that fight. And again, the big thing here is that unlike OSP, Cannonier is a good boxer who knows how to maintain distance and reserve his energy by fighting with efficient tactics. He's got a very good jab, a very stiff, quick, snapping jab. He knows how to pivot, which is shockingly rare in MMA, saying nothing about the light heavyweight division, which is almost non-existent to see good footwork there. And Cannonier's got a nice pivot. He can tuck his chin behind his shoulder and wheel away from a strike. And if he can maintain that distance, that's not where Glover Teixeira is best. Glover Teixeira is all short game. He could have been a great hockey enforcer because his style seems made to grab onto someone's jersey and pummel them into submission. It's overhand, short overhand, the cross counter, and short left hook. And there's not much else. The occasional jab, but mostly he likes to slip his way in past the jab and throw those short bombs. And so there's an opportunity there. There's a stylistic edge. The wrinkle that makes it more than just an opportunity for Jared Cannonier is that Glover Teixeira is a very good wrestler. He has an excellent single leg game in particular. And of course, he is terrifying from top position. His wrestling is only so scary because you know what comes after it. Because when Glover Teixeira gets half guard or mount, both with his striking and his submissions, he's a pretty scary dude. A lot of submission finishes, a lot of TKOs from top position, and it can take a lot of energy. He's got a very stable game from that position. So, OSP basically killed himself by bench pressing Glover Teixeira off of him again and again, just turning over and standing up in classic Derek Lewis fashion. And unless you're Derek Lewis, that's not a wise way to approach standing up from bottom. But again, on the other side, Jared Cannonier's not OSP on the ground either. He's actually got some okay jiu-jitsu. He's pretty good defensively, especially I was impressed with him against Yohan Cutelaba, who we have both said several times is really dangerous with his ground and pound.
Mm-hmm.
And Cannonier defended himself remarkably well. Yeah, he got taken down and controlled a bit. He dropped the first round as a result of that happening twice. He got taken down 6 times, so that's worrying. But he ended up getting back up and keeping himself safe enough to win the last 2 rounds. So Teixeira is more control-oriented than Cutelaba. I just think there are a lot of really fascinating wrinkles to this fight that make it interesting to me. I'm going to go with the chance pick and take Jared Cannonier in a minor upset by decision. Though I would not be surprised if he clipped Teixeira and knocked him out. And I also would not be surprised, of course, if Teixeira won, because he's a top light heavyweight, very experienced. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I might follow you on this path. Feel a little weird about it.
It seems strange, right? Because you hear
Yeah.
this fight announced, you're like, no, it makes no sense. He's only just, but he's improving at a pretty rapid rate. Pretty rapid rate.
He is improving rapidly. I don't think his wrestling is going to get fixed. That's the biggest thing, and that's the thing that should be giving me real hesitation here.
But if Cannonier can keep him at long range, it's not like Teixeira is a great shot takedown artist.
No,
it's mostly like snatch singles in the pocket.
Yeah. But the fact that
I should credit, by the way, my co-host Pat Wyman for pointing that out to me. I stole that from him.
But the fact that Cannonier was taken down so many times by Cutelaba, part of that is he's not absolutely great at maintaining range.
Yeah. No.
He's not. A big part of that is his style is really built on him being way outside and staying way outside, and then jumping in for a big strike. If he doesn't have something to counter, then like leaping in for a big strike and then getting back out immediately. And when you leap in like that, you're really dangerous, but you also open yourself right up to being taken down by somebody who can time you well. I still think, Teixeira's trending towards the point, though, where it's just like, maybe I just don't pick you. Maybe I don't pick him to win dangerous fights. That's kind of...
he's definitely going to beat, like, the Shoguns and the Little Nogs of the division. But I think he's at the point where he's going to start to have a much harder time against the next level athletes who are still in their primes.
This definitely feels like one of those potential turning points where somebody like Cannonier can create a lot of chaos by knocking out Glover Teixeira. It's absolutely crystal clear as day to me that Teixeira could take Cannonier down, transition into a half guard, link up an arm triangle, and have this fight done in 3 minutes.
He could even get him on the feet.
Yeah.
Cannonier takes a little while to get his range going. He got clipped by Cutelaba a few times, and of course he was knocked out by Sean Jordan.
Yeah. So there are a lot of options here. I have this sinking feeling that you are correct, and I'm going with the gut pick as well on Cannonier. Shouldn't be that way. He doesn't deserve to be a favorite, but that's the way it is. Cannonier opened at plus 160, dropped quickly down to plus 120, and has been rising back up to plus 160 ever since. And Teixeira opened at minus 210, went up to minus 150 briefly, and has been trending down to minus 205 ever since. So these odds jumped up closer initially and have been trending back away towards normal. I think the odds are probably about right. Plus minus 200 feels right to me on a fight like this. But Cannonier inside the distance at plus 330 seems like a good idea to me, maybe, potentially.
Yeah, even, what is he, plus 180 on the regular line?
Yeah.
The 35% chance of victory.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little closer than that. I think it may be. I think it may be more of a pick'em. So it feels like more of a pick'em. So
yeah, Cannonier inside distance, or unfortunately, fight doesn't go to decision is minus 240. Under 1.5 rounds is not something I would pick. Minus 105. Over 1.5 is minus 115. So you're really not getting any value in there.
No, unless you have two like really consistent early knockout artists facing each other, I don't tend to go for it. Only when it's, like Poirier Miller when the line is set at 2.5 rounds.
Yeah,
you got a lot of room for error there. But 1.5 with two guys who aren't necessarily quick finishers, is dicier.
So Cannonier inside the distance at plus 330 might be worth a look. Otherwise, I think the odds on this are pretty close to right maybe an underdog bet on Cannonier because I'm picking him, but it's such a gut pick for me because the wrestling is still a problem, and Teixeira is not a bad wrestler and a very good top control player.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to Jacare versus Tim Boetsch. And I get it. I get that there's no reason top 10, top 15, top 20 middleweights shouldn't fight each other when dudes need to fight. And Jacare needs to get paid, and Tim Boetsch gets a chance at a massive upset. I think the problem for me with this fight is Jacare legitimately has a case for title contention right now. Even without winning another fight, he could be in line for the title. If Yoel Romero got injured tomorrow, Jacare would be next in line. Tim Boetsch, even off a win over Jacare, is not in title contention.
Yeah, it wouldn't put him. It would drop Jacare a lot and not raise Boetsch as much as he would want to.
Yeah, like Boetsch has gotten some really good matchups for him lately. Guys that need to walk into the clinch to beat him.
Mm-hmm.
Guys that want to walk in and play his game. But he's also fought guys that want to play his game, and Dan Henderson and Ed Herman, who absolutely toasted him there. Otherwise, Boetsch is still more or less the fighter he's been. And one of the big things about Tim Boetsch is that if you're a much better wrestler and grappler than him, he's never been hard to beat there. His game is built very offensively. Top control, top ground and pound, and big throws in the clinch. Everything else is like a mystery.
He's kind of like Holly Holm with her boxing, because for a guy with a pretty credible wrestling background, he's almost embarrassingly easy to out-wrestle.
Yeah. And Jacare has this lovely little thing that he does that I immediately associate with Jacare over all other fighters, which is that he winds into the pocket like a snake with these big hooks coming in over the top.
Yeah.
Right into a double leg, pulls you to the ground, and then he has you on your ass before you know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And man, that's just too easy for me to see. So I got to pick Jacare by submission.
Yep. There's no need talking about it much. I did say at the top of the show I have a weird feeling about Boetsch, but weird feelings are not to be trusted, really. Especially not when there's logic to back them up, as in the case of the Cannonier pick, where it also kind of makes sense. As long as Jacare comes out and looks for a takedown early, he will win this fight. Yep. But he's also very slow on his feet. He's pretty inactive with his striking. Kind of predictable. Doesn't really throw a lot of good jabs or angle a lot. And he's also a little chinny. He has been caught and hurt in the past. So if Jacare fights unintelligently, if he does not immediately look for to set up his takedown, if he stalks and waits and lets Boetsch kind of time his range, feel his range, get his timing, and work on a setup for a counter, or if Boetsch comes after him from the bell, there are chances, because Tim Boetsch is always dangerous. We know that. But most likely Jacare takes him down and kind of insta-taps him, much in the way that Luke Rockhold did.
Yeah. Yeah, the only, and because it's not like Boetsch is a great range striker too. The biggest thing with Boetsch is that he's a surprisingly creative range striker. So dudes think that there's gonna be nothing coming, and they'll be like a front kick, and they'll be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah, he's pretty. His range striking, his selection of strikes at range is always kind of baffled me. It's like lead rights and front kicks for a stocky dude. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? You're just making it worse. But yeah, but he's Boetsch, man. You gotta love him.
Yeah. Jacare is the favorite, opening at -765, closing at -526. Boetsch opening at +455, closing at +390. I have no problem with these odds, and I wouldn't bet underdog. I wouldn't bet on like any sort of favorite for Jacare until it's maybe in the 300 range. Like, at anything higher than that, it just doesn't make any sense.
Under 1.5 rounds is -145.
Yeah, that's maybe worth something.
Maybe something. You can really see Jacare like immediately taking Boetsch down and wrapping up his neck. Nobody has a scarier squeeze than Jacare.
Yep. And
Souza by submission is -155, but it's only on one book.
Yeah. So.
But maybe the under on the total is worth something.
Yeah, the under on the total might be worth something. That would be the only thing I could see. Otherwise,
it's weird that the odds makers seem to have no idea how the style matchups will play out in a lot of these bouts.
Yeah.
Even when they clearly know who should be favored and by about how much, the totals, which usually indicate how the momentum of the fight is going to go in some way, are really weird.
If you're looking for the chance pick to make you money, Boetsch inside the distance is +670.
Yeah.
If you absolutely are convinced that Tim Boetsch is going to win this fight, the only pretty much way he'd do it is by knockout.
You'd be a fool, but if it happens, you'd be a very excited fool.
Yeah, you would be a fool. Do not do that. But I'm telling you it's there, but I'm telling you to avoid it.
Right. What a cruel parent you'll be someday, Zane. You're like, do not eat the cookies. They're in this clear jar. They're just out of your reach. Do not eat the cookies.
Oh, no, I'd put it on the floor, you know.
Right there. The lid's off. Nope, you're just hoping to spank that kid.
All right, that brings us...
Give me a reason, son.
These are the reasons I do not have kids.
Because you would beat them mercilessly.
That's right. So we're saving myself from jail here. Yeah. That brings us to our co-main event: Anderson Silva versus Derek Brunson. And God,
This is a love-hate fight, man.
This is a love-hate fight, and I really, really, really want to pick Derek Brunson here. Really a lot. And I think Anderson Silva's going to win. And that just feels dumb. Like, man, watching that Brunson against Robert Whittaker.
Don't remind me, man.
Like, because this is the same. There's nothing different about the approach Brunson had against Robert Whittaker to the approach he had against Uriah Hall, Carneiro, Sam Alvey, or Ed Herman.
Robert Whittaker the same way he approached Sam Alvey. Both counterpunchers, two very different opponents.
And the difference being that Robert Whittaker actually has like a pretty complex fight game from the get-go.
Oh yeah.
He's a good athlete. He knows how to counter wrestle. He has a very clear game plan. He knows how to execute it.
And he hits real hard and he's very accurate.
Yeah. And when that happened, Brunson had no answer at all. He just, he landed shots and he hurt him. And if he does that to Anderson Silva, he can knock him out. There's no question. But God, is he so wide? Like, there were points in that where he would, like, go for, like, be swinging with both arms, and suddenly he'd end up almost falling over, plant one arm right on the ground in front of Brunson, nearly tipped over, or in front of Whittaker, rather, nearly tipped over, and then, like, keep trying to chase from that position.
It was worse than what Fabricio Verdum did to Stipe Miocic, and a lot of people mocked Verdum for how foolish that approach was. And it was worse because he actually survived what the knockout punch that put Verdum's lights out. He survived that first big counter and kept chasing. It's like, Derek, my man, like, you had a great fight with Yoel Romero. You didn't go crazy. If you hadn't had your jaw broken in the third round by the king of third round finishes, you probably would have won that fight. And then you approach Robert Whittaker the same way you approach. I had so much hope that Brunson was going to discipline himself more for that. I suspect it may have something to do with the fact that he's training a lot more in South Carolina these days. North Carolina, it may be in his home gym. where, he looks okay from there, but I just don't think he has the discipline. It strikes me as the difference is not necessarily the techniques being trained so much as it is the game plans with which he's being provided, because Greg Jackson can game plan like a boss. And when Derek Brunson had a game plan against Yoel Romero, he looked really sharp. And when he fought Robert Whitaker without Greg Jackson, he looked like a man with no game plan.
Yeah, the other part of this too that I wonder about, and because you're right to bring up that he has had more disciplined fights. His Lorenz Larkin fight was very disciplined, very straightforward dismantling of Larkin. Mm-hmm. Not thrilling, but really just clinical. Mm-hmm. So there's a chance that he can get back to that, and if he does, he could absolutely just wreck Anderson Silva. I have the feeling that Silva in any fight is always near the point of collapse these days.
If Carolina training is the factor, however, I should point out that he has been training in Carolina, not in Albuquerque.
Yeah, and the other part of it is too that when a guy gets a style like Brunson's had, I really, really, really hesitate to feel like they can actually dismantle it. Like, a lot of fighters, when they get really confident and they really they channel their whole style through confident aggression, and suddenly they have to I actually have to back off. That was a mistake. Suddenly it can be almost impossible to take the foot off without and maintain the success.
Yeah.
Suddenly what used to be a very clinical approach in his Larkin fight or in his Romero fight becomes a very hesitant and unwilling approach in the future, saying, "Oh no, I can't fight reckless anymore, so I'm just gonna not pull the trigger at all now." And that would be my big concern even here, is that if he does approach Anderson Silva carefully, it'll just be, let me stand at range and watch Anderson Silva dance in front of me.
Yeah.
So I have to. I don't want to, but I'm picking Anderson Silva. And I love Anderson Silva. It's not like I don't want to pick Anderson Silva because I dislike Anderson Silva. I love Anderson Silva. But Anderson Silva...
Derek Brunson likes Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
They were buddy at the stare down, because who wouldn't be? Anderson's the guy.
Yeah. I don't think Anderson Silva should be fighting anymore. I'm not going to tell him to retire because that's his choice. Mm-hmm. But he's at a point that I'm not enthusiastic in any way, shape, or form to watch him compete.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that excites me really is that there's a clear opportunity for a fighter like Anderson here.
Yeah.
Against a guy like Brunson. Now, I want to quibble a little bit with what you said about that confidence, because I kind of disagree. I think it would be worse for Brunson if his crazy brawling, swarming style was a result of lack of confidence. Because if that's the case, it's going to be really hard to train out of him. If the case is that when he feels threatened, or when he doesn't feel comfortable, or whatever, when he starts to feel insecure in some way, he goes nuts, then any fighter who finds a way to make him uncomfortable is going to cause him to revert to that. Whereas if he's doing it because he's way too confident in his ability to swarm, I think that can be checked pretty soundly by, eating 90 vicious counter punches and then having a head kick send you sailing through the ether. So I think a fighter's ego, when ego is a problem, which it often is very, very much a roller coaster, where you get really, really high on confidence when you get these big wins, and you get really, really low when you suffer a bad loss. So if it's overconfidence, which I think it might be,
I think it is, absolutely,
then I think he could come in here and be more disciplined. But I've been too hopeful, obviously, about Derek Brunson's ability to discipline himself for specific style matchups in the past. So if I don't understand the issue, or if for whatever reason he still feels confident doing that after his last fight, then yeah, Anderson still dangerous, still super fast in bursts, but in his old age, a lot of the intangible things the things that even kept Anderson at the peak of the sport after I think he began to decline,
Oh yeah.
they're no longer there. You know,
Yeah.
he's still fast, still dangerous, but he doesn't pull the trigger as much anymore. He doesn't have his chin anymore. You know, he gets hurt a lot more easily now. He doesn't seem to have great stamina. I think it's part of the reason he doesn't pull the trigger as much, because I recall a lot of times in the Bisping fight where he was just kind of resting and letting Bisping win the round.
Yep.
It's just like Anderson Silva has always been a guy who he's the ultimate dynamic fighter. He doesn't win rounds. He wins big moments. He's got the most knockdowns in UFC history, and pretty much 90% of the time he knocks you down. Historically, he's quickly finished you afterward. You know, you get hurt by Anderson Silva, chances are slim that you survive. But the worrying thing for Anderson is that he still has those moments, and they no longer lead to the end of the fight.
Yeah.
The way they used to. So yeah, it's kind of sad to see Anderson go out like this. I support his desire to keep on fighting. You know, he's had some terrible things happen to him recently in the cage and outside of it. I'm sure he knows it's bad for him, and he clearly enjoys it. I think he still loves martial arts. So go Anderson. Would love to see you do well, but I think Derek Brunson is going to knock him out.
Yeah, that would be the sad way for this to go. I just watching tape on Brunson is just like, man,
it's he's a really good fighter too. You know, when he wants to be, he's very good, and when he doesn't want to be, he's still really dangerous.
Oh yeah, he's a
powerful
great
and very
athlete.
athletic. Yeah,
Very dangerous. Yeah, I think maybe you know you're probably right. The truth is that he's also tough enough that he can wade through a little bit of fire and keep swinging and keep going after somebody. And I don't know that Anderson can make somebody pay for continually going after him at this point. He can make them pay once, but can he make them pay over and over and over again the way he used to? And that,
yeah, like I said, I mean, Brunson took a better shot than the one that knocked out Verdum while rushing forward more recklessly. He still survived to eat about 30 more clean blows to the head after that. He's durable despite the fact that he's very vulnerable to counters.
yeah, that's true.
I totally get the Anderson pick though. Like if who knows? Like I don't know how to feel about Brunson anymore.
You're
Because
making
I
me
really
back
thought
off of it though, because I don't want to pick Anderson. I really don't. I don't think he has any business being in a fight like this, and you know, I think that a Rashad Evans fight would have made infinite more sense.
Yeah.
If they had to have him fighting somebody. But yeah, I don't know. You're really making me feel like I should not be picking Brunson here or picking Anderson here. It's just how sloppy he's willing to get. And like I say, the big thing too, it's maybe not so much like a lack of confidence thing for me. It's that anytime a fighter late in their career has to change their style a lot, I have very, like, my feeling about that is always really bad. It's just like, even if it's super necessary for them to change their style a lot, I'm always just like, you're probably gonna fail really miserably.
Yeah, the thing is, because Brunson has had such flashes of brilliance, I don't know that it's. I mean, in a sense, it is his style to go nuts because
It
it's
is.
what
It
he
has
does.
become his style. That's the thing.
Yeah, right. But also, I do think it really has to do with game planning and like having an idea, because I think my feeling is that he does it when he's not sure where to go next. So like whatever his first idea was doesn't work, and he goes crazy. Or he just overlooked the opponent and didn't game plan. He and his team did not game plan, and he goes crazy from the get-go. But in fights that I know he's been well coached, the Larkin and Romero fights stand out, of course. He hasn't done that at all. He hasn't gone crazy. You know, he still has some technical deficiencies, but he's been a really smart fighter.
Yeah.
So I still have hope for Brunson, but again, if that's the factor, he's at the camp where that seems to be the problem. Yeah. So he may just go nuts and chase Anderson and immediately get knocked out.
All right. You know what? I've been convinced, though, slowly. I'm changing my pick to Derek Brunson.
Ooh,
and I'm doing it because I should be consistent. And the consistency in my life is understanding that when fighters get old, you got to know when to get off the bandwagon. And
yeah, it's also what makes their late career wins so great. Though.
It is.
Because if Anderson wins,
that's amazing.
It's going to be amazing. It's going to be like Henderson beating Lombard. It's going to be better, you know?
Yeah. So, all right, I'm picking Brunson, but I'm not doing so happily. And I'm doing so in the full knowledge that Brunson can take a few shots and Anderson does not deliver shots nearly as in nearly as close a succession as he used to.
Mm-hmm.
He's not very good at making people pay for every opening they give him the way he used to.
Now, just because I used to do mock trial and I'm a very convincing man, don't get mad at me when Anderson Silva knocks down.
No, if Anderson Silva wins by knockout, that's on you. If Brunson wins, then it was all my own idea. That's how this works.
And I led you astray.
Derek Brunson opened at -130 and is now at -144. Anderson opened at -110, is now at +120. I think that's actually perfectly good. Anderson Silva should not be the favorite here, frankly. As reckless as Brunson can be, Anderson has not won a fight officially since 2012.
Been a long time now.
Unofficially, it was a really weird clown show over Nick Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
And that should not give anybody a lot of faith.
Yeah, there are not many odd lines here, not even the props that really look good to me.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel confident enough, and it's too much of a pick 'em to bet on either guy inside the distance, even though both guys are pretty good finishers. And under 1.5 rounds, maybe not, you know?
Yeah. That would be the only thing I would see is under 1.5 because Brunson is super reckless. Anderson is dangerous. Anderson is also old and more brittle, and Brunson is super aggressive.
Right.
So I think we're headed towards a quick finish either way. That brings us to our main event, Holly Holm versus Germaine de Randamie. And this is you, I believe.
Oh, and I yawned just at the right time, which is not demonstrative of how I feel about this fight. We talked about it at the top of the show. I like it. I think it's an interesting matchup. It's, as far as I can tell, a kickboxing bout. And that's kind of interesting. You don't really see that often in MMA, even as MMA becomes more of the sport of strikers, where good kickboxers are the champions nowadays. You still don't see many fights. Like guys like TJ Dillashaw are taking people down. You know, they still have that to mix into their game. Guys like Cody Garbrandt, they have wrestling. So, yeah, it's interesting. I do think that if Holly Holm is smart, she will utilize takedowns, because I think she's already proven in defending submissions from Ronda Rousey, in handling herself on the ground against Valentina Shevchenko, and in, you know, holding her own in the clinch against Raquel Pennington. Holly Holm is big and strong. She's got some okay, if a little raw, wrestling skill, and similar, I think, with her jiu-jitsu. I have a feeling she's better trained in that at Jackson's than Germaine de Randamie is at whatever her camp is in the Netherlands. Because de Randamie, you know, Holly Holm has never been utterly schooled on the ground. She's always been fairly difficult to take down and fairly crafty on the ground. Germaine de Randamie has always looked at her absolute worst whenever the fight goes to the floor. It's when she's been her least effective. But that, I think, has frequently clouded our eyes when it comes to how good Germaine de Randamie actually is at what she does well. And so if the assumption that this is a kickboxing bout more or less is true, and if Holm is, even if she does try to wrestle, isn't actually good enough to dominate de Randamie, because she's not a grappler by trade either, then we have a really interesting fight on our hands, because Holly Holm, for all of her long tenure as a boxing champion, has a weird boxing style, one that has a lot of obvious limitations. I talked about it in an article recently. I talked about it way back when she was about to fight Raquel Pennington. And I even talked about it after she beat Ronda Rousey. The peculiarities of Holly Holm's style make it difficult, ironically, for her to outstrike fellow strikers in MMA. I think she's had trouble with people who actually fight with her at range, whether it's Raquel Pennington, before Pennington really came into her own as a boxer, or Shevchenko, who arguably won every single round against Holly Holm and certainly outclassed her or outfought her and outgeneraled her in that fight. She controlled Holly in that fight. She controlled that fight, and Holly was kind of left to flail and hope that she could land something. And the problem with Holly Holm's technique is that she's almost incapable of throwing a really hurtful punch. It's just true. It's really not meant to be a disparaging remark or anything. She's just the way she carries herself, weight forward, head close to the opponent. And when she relies so much on her left hand, on that rear left hand, you got to pull your weight back before you can land a good cross. And also, you got to surprise the opponent. And when your weight's all on your front foot and you're leaned as far forward as you can go, it requires that you step into range to land a punch, which to an experienced striker is a pretty obvious move. Experienced strikers snap off their punches and step in at the same time, or sneak their way into range and pop you when you're not quite sure whether they're in range or not. Holly Holm has to rush into the pocket to land powerless punches. So I called it in my article an unhappy medium, right? Because typically when a fighter's punches are easy to see coming, at least they pack a wallop. And typically when they're hard to see coming, they're at least, or typically when they don't carry power, they're at least surprising. They're difficult to predict. And Holly doesn't really enjoy either advantage. So she relies a lot on attributes. She's a really good athlete. She's always been really well conditioned. Her stamina.
Well, we lost Connor. He's talking about Holly Holm's stamina and athleticism, which I agree. Holly Holm's always been a really superb athlete. That's one of the things that really pushed her in the early stages of that Ronda Rousey fight, was that she is very, very good at separating and at using her athleticism. And oh, you're back. Good.
All right. Sorry about that. It's got to happen once per show, right?
Yep.
I was saying about Holly, she's always been very well conditioned. Her stamina is unquestioned. She has never shown signs of slowing down late in a fight. In fact, even after taking somewhat of a beating from Valentina Shevchenko, she poured it on in the fifth round. Now, she didn't land any more than she did in the previous rounds, but she threw about 3 times as many punches. And that's impressive in the fifth round of a 25-minute fight. So work rate, cardio, desire, toughness. These are things that Holly Holm has. These are the ways that she was a successful boxer in an admittedly shallow talent pool. And these are the ways that she's won her mixed martial arts bouts. And also there was a bit of a sort of a bluff for her early in her career where people feared her hands. And so she used them to disguise her kicks, which are the one strike that she throws. Her left round kick is a really dangerous strike. She throws that very well and accurately and fast and powerfully. So that is a thing that de Randamie will have to watch out for. But Germaine de Randamie, not only is she just an experienced striker, she's also bigger than Holly. She's longer. She's taller. Unlike Holly, she has a jab that she uses consistently and knows how to step in and really snap it off to pop her opponent's head back. She's got power in her hands. And Holly often rushes herself into the clinch. And Germaine de Randamie is really good in that range. So unless Holly Holm gets really lucky with a very unlikely power shot or a really well disguised kick, because she could do it through skill and not luck, of course, if she's using her kicks, and or unless she comes in and she really surprises de Randamie with a sort of a wrestling game, I think she might lose a fairly competitive kickboxing match to Germaine de Randamie. So I'm going to go with de Randamie by decision.
Yeah, I don't discount that at all, and I think that it's totally reasonable. I am leaning towards Holm, though, for one big reason, which is that de Randamie has never looked like a very comfortable striker when she's facing somebody who is not totally terrified of her. I mean, her knockout wins are Stephanie Weber in 2011, Larissa Pacheco, and Anna Elmos. In other words,
And
otherwise
who
it's...
knows that that may have been the case. Sorry for interrupting. That may have been the case in her kickboxing career as well, because the 37-0 looks good, but
yeah, it could mean
I
nothing.
I doubt that women's Muay Thai in Europe is that stacked.
Well, and kickboxing records, anytime you see kickboxing records, especially ones with a 0 on the other side, be suspicious. Most of your really good top-end kickboxers fight like 150 times and lose like 50,
Yeah.
And
most fighters in general, if you have an undefeated record, you're either pretty inexperienced or you're probably not facing the best fighters you could face.
Boxing does a lot of work to really protect top talent. If you're...
Right. But that's the idea. Even then, most of the time, they're not facing the best fighters they could be facing.
But your best boxers in the world, like I say, I mean, they're going to be kind of shielded up into the top, and then they might lose a couple fights. But with kickboxing, they don't do a lot of work to protect people, honestly. Usually. It's just sort of like, you're going to fight every week, and you'll if you win a lot more than you lose, you're a good kickboxer.
Yeah.
So de Randamie, her last 2 wins over Pacheco and Elmos have both been great and involved fighters that gave her exactly the right fight to show off. Everything else has been really underwhelming. She has always been a fighter who they talk about her kickboxing career and talk about how she could be dangerous and all that, and then she shows up and she will be low output at range or underwhelming in the clinch. Like, her clinch game is very good, but it's not unless she has a deal of physical dominance, it's not actually very active.
It's very much a Muay Thai clinch.
Yeah.
She's not great with her positional control. She does a lot of sort of risky wraps of the head and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if you're not letting her own the clinch, she'll tend to just try to press you into the cage and lock you down there.
Yeah, or be pressed into the cage.
And Holly Holm is, as we saw in the Ronda Rousey fight, is very good and strong about staying out of the clinch. Like, she has a very clean clinch break. It's something I think that, in general, is a Jackson Wink strength that they tend to do. It's something that Donald Cerrone does very well. That when he gets locked down in the clinch, he breaks it really quickly and gets out and knows exactly how to exit. And it's something Holly Holm does as well. And I think if de Randamie's recent success is indicative that she has found more confidence in her boxing and that she can continue to unleash jab cross combos with power and step in on Holm and punch her, then I think de Randamie can take this fight. But if this is just a range kickboxing bout of who's busy, I think Holly Holm is going to be busy, and I don't trust de Randamie to be busy.
The thing that worries me about that, though, is that Holm is very inaccurate.
I know.
For such a lauded boxer. I mean, she whiffs a lot. I mean, a lot of that activity is, again, most effective against opponents who want nothing to do with their hands.
Yeah.
And I don't think de Randamie is likely to be as respectful. Whereas de Randamie is quite accurate. And also, again, she hits pretty damn hard.
She does. It's just, it's the difference between... It's finding the balance between inactivity and inaccuracy, and which one is more likely to win a round. And
I wouldn't say de Randamie's really at the extreme of inactivity.
She's been there before, though.
Holly Holm is definitely at the extreme of activity versus inaccuracy.
And de Randamie's been there before. Like, she, there's a reason that she went to decisions with somebody like Hiroko Yamanaka in Strikeforce, she's not been a killer. Her last 2 fights are like the real eye opener on that.
I really think it's just it's honestly de Randamie fearing the takedown.
Yeah, it could be. It could be her fearing the takedown. It could just be.
But it might also be that Elmos and Pacheco are just not that good.
They were really, really under
Yeah.
tutored, poor strikers that walked in 2 power shots over and over. The Pacheco fight is literally 2.5 rounds of Larissa Pacheco walking into the same right hand. And Elmos just let herself get locked up into a clinch where suddenly de Randamie was way bigger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Holm's going to do that. So I'm going to pick Holm off of an inaccurate volume game where de Randamie just never gets comfortable. But I think this could be a really ugly fight. It'll be if de Randamie comes out on fire and just has no respect for Holm at all and just decides I'm going to work a boxing game and I'm going to step in and box with you, I think she can beat Holly Holm.
Yeah, because ironically, I think that's the best way to fight Holly.
Yeah.
Is to outbox her.
Yeah. But if she is like, oh, she's a really good kickboxer and I need to watch myself and, I need to keep a patient range game and just stick to trying to win and find openings, I think she's just going to freeze up. So I am not going to be talked out of my Holly Holm pick, although you talked me out of my Anderson Silva pick.
You probably had the better one not to be talked out of, although I'm not sure. They both feel like pick'ems for different reasons.
Yeah. Holly Holm opened as the favorite in this fight, -130, is now at +101. And de Randamie opened at +100, is now down to -124. De Randamie has become the favorite here. I do not think this is worth betting on. Other than I would be, let's see, over 4.5 rounds. No, even that's -135 for over 4.5.
I mean, I think it probably will. You could go fight goes to decision for -125.
Yeah, that'd be
probably likely. I mean, Holm is super tough, even if de Randamie lights her up.
Yeah, Holm is super tough. De Randamie, I don't trust her output enough, and I don't trust Holm to get a finish.
Yeah,
so
I like how I didn't even mention the fact that de Randamie is tough because A, I don't really know, but also B, it doesn't necessarily matter against Holly.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't think Holm should be the underdog, frankly. De Randamie has not proven in any way, shape, or form that she's capable of winning a fight this big.
Yeah, it's like the Cannonier pick. This is like I'm looking at the style matchup, but the style matchup gives me this feeling that my pick will win, but also never before have we seen Cannonier and de Randamie take on opponents of this level.
Yeah.
So,
and unlike Cannonier and unlike light heavyweight, when I'm looking at there's no real hope of a finish, no expectation of a finish.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher for me to be like, oh, the person who hasn't been there before is going to get it done with the upset.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my feeling. I'm picking Holm. And any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
No. Have I convinced you in any way that this card is more interesting than it seems?
I like the card. I've liked it from the outset.
You were on my side already.
Yeah, I was on your side up from the beginning. We didn't really get a chance to go into that. I do see why nobody gives a crap about it, but I think it's going to be a really fun night of fights.
Hopefully we've convinced some others because I am weirdly into this card. I'm going to make some refried beans. I'm going to have some nachos, and I'm going to watch these fights, and it's going to be great.
The only bad thing is if Anderson Silva gets just shit kicked, and then de Randamie and Holm watch each other for 5 rounds.
It'd be a really slow end of the night.
It's going to be a really slow end of the night, especially if it comes right on the heels of like a quick finishes in Boetsch Souza and Teixeira Cannonier and Poirier Miller, where you have all this momentum and then it just fucking halts.
Yeah, even if it's as good a fight as Aldo Lamas, which was kind of interesting to watch Aldo pick Lamas apart. I remember how disappointing that fight seemed after the card before it.
Yeah.
So
So
just kind of, it's a bit of a downer sometimes if you have a slow fight at the end. And Holly Holm draws numbers, but that is often the case that her fights are a little slow and tedious.
yeah, and if Brunson loses and Holm de Randamie have a really fun chess match that is above a simmer, if de Randamie steps in to box and really tries to mess Holly up, or Holly Holm decides to wrestle and really forces a fight out of de Randamie, then the whole card could be pretty fun. So, on that note, thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. If you're watching this video over on YouTube, give it a like. That's a thumbs up. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM. That is where you get all our latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff. We will be back pretty soon. I'll be back for the 6th round with Eddie Mercado this week. Nate's out. And then we'll be back next week for the... Oh, what's the next fight card? The Lewis versus Brown fight card in Halifax. So,
Which is also kind of a good card, but boy, is that a main event.
yeah. All right. Well, on that note, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.